I have them right. Hola y'all! So today we are going to be doing something a little bit different. I recently decided that I wanted to help out some of the local bookstores in my neighborhood and just support some of the authors that have had a lot of really interesting work coming out lately, but also support the independent bookstores that are definitely being hit hard by the quarantine and everything else that's going on. So today we're going to be doing an indie bookstore haul. I have got my mask and I've ordered a few books. The way that this service works at my local bookstore is that you can call them or email them, give them the list of the books that you would like. They put in the orders for you and then you just come in and pick it up. So if you live in the south side of Jacksonville and you are looking for a bookstore to support, I highly suggest that you come to the Book Nook over here on University Boulevard. It's over by the Winn-Dixie and Dick's Wings. It's awesome. I love this place. They have always been super helpful and kind, and they even support local authors. They have a whole shelf that's dedicated just to local authors. So we're gonna head inside. I'm gonna walk around and give you guys a little mini tour. I don't wanna spend too much time in there, and then we'll go ahead and look at some of the books that I've purchased.
So I wanted to add that this mask was made by my abuela. She hand sewed it herself. And here we see some of the items and books that you can find at this particular bookstore.
Okay, so that was a little bit of what my independent bookstore in my neighborhood looks like. It includes a United States post office, and it also doubles as a vintage shop, so you can buy all kinds of cute little vintage gifts, knickknacks. Now let's dive into the reason why we're all here, the books that I decided to buy. I purchased in total 6 books for the month. Also, shout out to my water glass. I love this thing. I picked it up at a vintage shop when I lived in Memphis, and I just think it is so pretty. Great for holding water too. First up, we have Sea Spell by Jennifer Donnelly. This is the 4th book in the Waterfire saga, and I know I went on kind of a rant about the series in my April wrap-up, but I do want to clarify that I think there's a lot that this book series does well. I really appreciate the world building, the plot. I think the action scenes are really well done. So even though I have some issues with the characterization and even though I have some issues with the representation in the book, I do recognize that that might not be the main point of this book. And honestly, 3 books in, I really just want to finish the saga. So this book I'll probably save for the mermaid readathon that the Bright Side Girl, I think that's her name, does every year. So I'm going to link her channel and those videos down below because any excuse I have to read a book about mermaids, I'm there. I'm signed up. All right, the next book that I purchased from my local independent bookstore is Hermosa by Yesika Salgado. So this is the 3rd book in her Love in LA series. She wrote 3 books in 3 years, which is, first of all, insane because I've been writing 1 book of poetry for like 3 years. And so the idea that she could do this 3 books in 3 years is impressive in and of itself. But I'm really excited to read this book because it's her conclusion to that series, and I think any chance I get to support a poet like her, I'm gonna do it. So if you are interested in reading a book of poetry that is about love, Los Angeles, being Latina, being fat, she's your girl. She describes herself as a fat, fly, brown girl, and that energy comes through in all of her books. If you don't know, her other books are also, I have them right. Okay, let me fix that. Yikes! Okay, so these are her other 2 books. This is Corazón and this is Tesoro. So these 2 books I mean, first of all, these covers, I know we're not supposed to buy books based off the covers, but like, they killed this. This is so beautiful. Her voice is so necessary as a poet who does not have an MFA, didn't graduate high school, has a GED, and the amount of success that she's had in her career. I think it just goes to show how accessible poetry is becoming. So if you're someone who's looking to dive into poetry, but you're not sure where to start, and if you're also someone who loves reading romantic things, Yesika Salgado, start with Corazon and work your way through her series. And if you follow her on Instagram, she's hilarious and she gives excellent writing tips. She has a bunch of free workshops that are here on YouTube actually with her publisher, Not Occult Media. I'm gonna link those videos down below. Okay, the next book that I bought from my independent bookstore is The Deep by River Solomon. And I didn't realize this, but it was also, I guess, inspired by or made contributions with David Diggs, whom I love, and I know I'm married, but he will always hold a special place in my heart, and William Houston and Jonathan Snipes. So this book I actually heard about from Read with Cindy and Bow Ties and Books. I'm gonna link their channels down below, although they're way bigger than I am, so I'm sure they don't need my help. But they reviewed these books, so I'm gonna try and find those videos where they reviewed them, and I'm gonna link them down below. I love everything about the idea of this book, this idea of reimagining what happened to enslaved people that were thrown overboard, particularly the pregnant people that were thrown overboard, and exploring what that would be like. I think it has this really interesting concept to it that reminds me a little bit of The Giver in terms of having one person in the community who holds the memories of that community. I think I'm gonna save this book for the summer because I feel like I'm gonna need time to process it and read it, and I wanna make sure I do it justice. So I'm really excited about this book. Okay, next up is the book that I have been looking most forward to since I put in the order, and that is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. First of all, this title, if you know, you know. My husband, when he saw the title of this book, he literally said, oh, like when we went to Cuba, because this is something that Latinx people do all the time. Anytime you go on a flight where there's a large group of Latinx people, where when the plane lands, everybody claps. It's sort of like the way to celebrate that we arrived, we're safe, we're here, we're alive. And I think that's very fitting for this book because it is actually about a forgotten flight that essentially crashed. It happened after 9/11, I believe. So I think in all of the chaos around that time period, there was a flight from the Dominican Republic that was going to New York City that crashed, and it didn't get a lot of publicity about it. And I think that's such an interesting topic to write from. And so this book is basically like these two sisters that find out about each other as a result of that crash. Already I'm in, and it's also a novel in verse. So, you know, I am new to the novel in verse genre. The only books that I have that are also novels in verse are The Crossover by Kwame Alexander, which is a great book if you have middle school age boys and want to get them into reading, and also The Surrender Tree, which was my very first novel in verse that I ever read, and I loved it. It's all about the history of Cuba during the War for Independence from Spain. So I'm gonna link those books down below as well because I think both of them are really awesome. And I'm excited to get to Clap When You Land because Elizabeth Acevedo, I've said it before, this is an Elizabeth Acevedo stan channel. I love everything she writes. I think her perspective is so valuable, so necessary. And she is my window, she is my mirror, she's my daughter's mirror for sure. And I can't wait. I'm so excited. I'm also gonna do a vlog of reading that book because I know I need to dedicate an entire video just to that book. The next book I am also super excited for. It is another book of poetry. This is Homie by Danez Smith. As you guys know, Danez Smith is my favorite poet of all time, and they are a Black, queer, HIV positive poet based out of Minnesota. They have won all kinds of different awards, everything from Slam Championship awards to the Forward, which is one of the highest literary honors that anybody can ever get, particularly if you live in the UK. Honestly, like, Don't Call Us Dead was a book about such internal struggles and systemic struggles that they face being a Black, queer, HIV positive person. And from what I've heard about Homie, this is much more of a celebration of joy, specifically Black joy. I think Bookie Charm said it best when she talked about some of the poems that are in this book. I already know of some of the poems that are in here, and she phrased it as sort of like, when you get invited to a family party, you're a guest, and you have to remind yourself that you're a guest. And that's something I'm going to keep in mind as I read this book. Like, it's a privilege for me to get to read about such intimate experiences that they have, and I'm just excited to celebrate with them, but also not center myself in that reading process, which is kind of a tricky thing to balance because reading is so personal. But as I get older, I definitely understand when I need to think about, when is this story about me as a reader versus when is this about the person who's writing it. All right, the last book that I bought was Intergalactic Travels, Poems from a Fugitive Alien by Pelaez Lopez. They are a Afro-Indigenous poet. They're from Mexico originally. They were undocumented for several years as they crossed the border to the US. They're also known on Instagram as @MigrantScribble, and they are really changing the game for Latinidad in literature and Latinidad in general. If you don't know, like a year ago, there was this like sort of, not uproar, but I would definitely say there was this conversation about Latinidad and whether or not it should be canceled. And that's because this person started that conversation. And their entire argument is essentially that the identity of being Latina or Latinx or Latino excludes people of African and indigenous ancestry. Latinos, myself included, pride ourselves on being very progressive in terms of racial identity and having a mixture of racial identities, right? Because a lot of us tend to be of African, indigenous, and Spanish descent. And so because of that, we like to think of ourselves as sort of like a melting pot, a potaje, if you will. But in reality, it's not like that. And oftentimes the voices in the Latinx community that tend to be uplifted the most are people who look like me, people who present as white, who you might not realize are Latinx unless they said it. And I think that is such an important conversation to be having. I myself don't identify as white, but I also recognize that when people look at me, they tend to see a white person. And I think it's really important for me to read from the perspective of people like Alan, like Elizabeth Acevedo, who have been marginalized in our community for so long simply because they don't fit the ideal stereotype what a Latinx person should look like, right? They are not able to pass in society as white the way that I am. And so because of that, I think it's important that I check myself, particularly as a woman who is raising two Black Latino children. It's really important for me to make sure that I am consistently unlearning some of the internalized anti-Blackness that I have. Reading from poets like this will definitely help me do that. Aside from all of that, aside from the identity politics that this author presents within their work, I think it's also just like such an interesting work in itself. There's a lot of visual elements to the book, which I think is really powerful. I think including their own like actual pictures from childhood is also a really powerful thing to do. So I can tell that this work is incredibly personal. Okay, y'all, so that was all really heavy. I have some more lighthearted books and then I have some more serious books, and I've got a pretty good range going. So I've got 3 books that are just straight up poetry. I have 1 novel in verse, and then I have 2 fiction books. So as you can see, my tastes are pretty diverse. And also I only have 1 book by a white author. So I would love to hear what y'all's reading habits are, and I would also love to hear what kinds of books are you picking up from bookstores. Which bookstores do you go to and why? Are you a book outlet person? Are you an Amazon person? Are you an independent bookstore person like me? Are you a Barnes & Noble person? I know access to independent bookstores varies from city to city, so I'm just really curious to hear how people normally access their books and why they choose to access books in the way that they do. If you'd like to follow me on a more day-to-day basis, you can find me on Instagram, Goodreads, and Tumblr @ShellyFlowers. If you'd like to purchase my own book, Windows from the Swamp, you can find the link down below. And I hope you all have a wonderful, 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 wonderful time right now. If you are able to, and if it is possible for you to support your local economy, I highly, highly suggest you do so. Okay. Ciao, y'all.